Welcome to Kabbalistic Mystic, the podcast for the Western seeker, where we explore the tree of life and the ancient Hebrew wisdom as the lost spiritual heritage of the West. I'm your host, Ovadya, and today I want to tell you a little bit about my journey to Israel, the one I came back from just a few days ago. Those of you who listen to my episodes know that my grandfather died, my mother's father, and I went to Israel promptly to attend the 7 days of mourning. I did not make it to the funeral, unfortunately, and to just attend the various rituals surrounding the death. Every time somebody dies, there's a shift of consciousness in the family. Every time somebody dies, every time somebody born, the energy matrix of the various beings in the family is changing. People are no longer the same. And it is very important to be present with such changes and to honor those who have passed away, as I will articulate in this episode. And through the personal story, I'll talk to you a little bit about the diaspora and what it meant for the Jews, and what does it mean that the Jews are together again now in the land of Israel. All right, let's begin. My recent trip to Israel was inspirational, transformational. It is the first time I'm going to Israel for a funeral of a grandfather or a grandmother. Both my grandfather and my grandmother from my father's side. I chose not to go, and that was a decision I regret until this day. As I said before, whenever someone dies, there is tremendous implications for people within the family. The energy dynamics is shifting, and something is changing forever. And it is very important to notice what's happening, because every person in our family is essentially a reflection, a mirror of who we are. And somebody so pivotal, a kingpin like a grandfather or a grandmother, can teach us a lot about our own consciousness. Regardless, it's very important to support the people you love in this time of need. And unfortunately, prior to this particular death, years and years ago, when my grandfather and my grandmother from my father's side have passed away, I was not aware of the importance of this, nor did I have the connection in my heart. And I just did not bother taking up the flight and going to Israel. And as I said, I regret that I did not do that to this day. And not just because of the reflection to my own psyche, but also because I wasn't there for my father in the time of need. I wasn't there for my uncles. I wasn't there for anybody, really, not even for me, and did not honor the death of those who brought me to the world. But this time, I did not make the same mistake, and I got on a plane and I went to Israel, and I immediately dove into the rituals of mourning that are essentially new to me, because I, again, have never attended, such a ritual, especially not in my mother's family. Now, my mother is from Yemen. My dad's from Iraq. Now, Jews, taking a step backwards, you have to remember, came from all over the place. The big diaspora started about 70 BC. The king of the Romans at the time, Titus, destroyed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and sent all the Jews to the four corners of the earth. Now, if you think about it, this was really known in the Jewish prophecy. We knew that there would be a diaspora. It was a piece of the puzzle. It's as if we're living a pre-written story, that the skeleton is already written and we get to play the parts and play the specifics. So there was a knowing that the diaspora would happen. And what happened is the Halacha, the law, the Jewish law, became so strict because that was the only way to preserve the knowledge and the secret throughout the 2,000 years of the diaspora. And what happened? The Jews were spread to the four corners of the earth and basically found themselves in every country you can imagine. My wife was just in India. In fact, she was in India when my grandfather died. And we didn't know that that would happen. I was supposed to go with her to India, and I canceled. And I'm glad I canceled because I probably wouldn't have even heard that my grandfather died. And, I just picked up my stuff and went. And she came back a couple of weeks later, and then I came back the following week. So we were both gone. And she's in India, and I'm in Israel. And she's sending me pictures from a Jewish synagogue that she found in Kochi Jews. There are Jews everywhere. There's Jews in North Korea. There's Jews in South Korea. There are Jews in every country in the Middle East. There's Jews in Africa, South America. So Jews were really sent everywhere. And if you can look at it from a really interesting perspective, there was a secret. The secret in Judaism is called the how would you say that in English? The string of the candle. That little string in the middle of the candle that allows you to connect back into the light. A candle without that particular patil, as we say in Hebrew, is not really a candle. And in order to preserve it, we were sent to all the corners of the earth. The reason for that, from the perspective of the Roman king, was so that we would not come together and therefore become strong again and object the ruler. But really, it was an amazing thing that was done, because think about it this way. Let's say you're a posse of people who are being chased by somebody who wants to obtain a particular object that you are carrying. And you're arriving in a particular place in the forest or in nature, and you're saying, okay, in order to maximize the chances of us keeping this particular item, keeping it safe, we're going to split. Everybody's going to go in a different direction. And hopefully they're not going to be able to catch all of us. Now, in this particular case, the Jews went to all corners of the earth with the same secret. The secret was passed verbally and with teachings. Just like I said in one of the previous episodes, you have to remember this was a time where people, the average individual across the land, the world, did not know how to read and write. This was not a common thing in the various cultures. But in Judaism, the Jews, starting the age of 3, the age of 4, the kids were taught how to read and write. The intellect became the protective chest in which the secret of Judaism, the secret of the ancient Hebrew wisdom, really was preserved. And that secret, that wasn't just the heritage of the Jewish people, of the Israelites. These secrets, that was also the secret that was predominant in ancient Egypt, in various parts of Europe, in other nations within the Middle East, have withered and died in each and every other culture. And all we have is remnants of that secret in the teachings of alchemy, in the teachings of ancient Egypt, in the teaching of the masonry buildings, in the teachings of the occultists, in the teachings of Christianity, the original teachings, the Gnostic Gospels, and even a little bit in the teachings of the Islam. But it's all residue. It's all bits and pieces. The actual secret was only kept very carefully within the Jewish tradition. And what we have to thank for that is the obsessive compulsive nature of the Jewish people. The fact that they were not willing to change even one word of the Torah, of the Bible. The fact that they decided that they will bear the cross, so to speak, of preserving all the laws, always adding, never taking away. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is intense. As somebody who grew up with that reality, I can tell you that is intense. And the halacha, but that rigidity has helped us preserve it until the diaspora was done. And we found ourselves, Jews, coming together in a melting pot from all corners of the earth, back in the Holy Land, not only trying to kind of make sense of everything that happened, of the Holocaust that just took place in the 1940s, but also of the differences between us. What does it mean that we all do not look alike? How did that happen? What does it mean that our laws and customs have shifted? That there's 4 different versions to the Book of Formation. Not so different. We've done a pretty good job preserving it across the various cultures, but there are differences. And then when you look at the tapestry of various Jews in the state of Israel, you start seeing the differences and the various traditions. For example, the Ashkenaz Jews, a lot more entrenched in art and culture. They came from Europe, especially Eastern Europe, Vilna, Poland, places like that. A lot of wisdom, a lot of scholars Jewish scholars came from that place. You have in Spain, you have the awakening of Kabbalah. Rabbis, amazing Kabbalists like Rabbi Yosef Jikdila, who I admire personally, who wrote books like Sha'ar HaNikud and books like Sha'ar Tzedek, explaining how the tree of life works, how the Hebrew letters are really a map of human consciousness evolution. Amazing, amazing Kabbalists from Spain. In Bavel, in Iraq, you had the Talmud. The Talmud originated there. There's 2 types of Talmud. There's the Bavelian, I don't know how you say that in English, Talmud. That is the de facto, Talmud that the average Jew would be studying. Amazing mystic scholars within that region. There's also the Jerusalem Talmud that is less common and essentially tracks the various discussions of the rabbis that were in Jerusalem at the time. And then there's Jews from Africa. And each and every country, each and every section of Judaism have their own uniqueness in a way, their own unique balance between, I would say, masculine and feminine. If the Jews from Poland had a fairly healthy amount of femininity entrenched in their culture, in the sense of a lot of arts, a lot of culture, understanding of the value of arts, and the interaction with the world, a lot of secular Jews too. The Jews that were the bread and earth of the world, the Jews from countries like Yemen, were the Jews that were still extremely connected to the intellect and yet not very connected to the feminine part, that is the emotion. But the tradition was preserved, according to my own experience, the best within those tribes. Case in point, the Jews that came from Yemen, very poor Jews who were merchants, but also, growing goats and milk and making bread, very, very simple Jews, Arab Jews, really, from which my mother's family came, are extreme scholars. You're talking about people who know the Bible by heart. Not every Yemenite. There's all kind of Yemenites. There's Yemenites from the city. There's Yemenites from the villages. But my mother's family, that I have discovered when I was in Israel as of late, is a family of scholars. And a lot of Yemenites are. You don't know that about them. They're very, very humble people. So if we look at the tree of life, we have humility on one side, which is hod, grace, and netzach on the other side, which a lot of time encompasses pride. Donald Trump, for example, will have a lot of netzach and very little hod. That balance that is maintained everywhere in the universe. For the Yemenite people, they had a lot of hod, a lot of humility, a lot of quietness, a lot of submission, but not enough dominance. And they were, when the state of Israel was established, when all these people came, they were the lowest of the low. They had nothing. My grandfather and my grandmother came to Israel out of the love of the country. My grandmother was married to my grandfather. She was, what's that word? My mind just went blank. She became engaged to my grandfather when she was 12 years old. She was married, I believe, when she was 16. I'm not sure, maybe 15. But they came to Israel just a few years later, and they came with nothing. And they came purely out of the love of the country, believing that the diaspora has ended and it is time to go back to the Holy Land. And so they come and they live in absolutely dirt poor. My grandfather walking around, a young man in his 20s, walking around barefooted in the streets of Jerusalem. Israel was a very, very poor country at the time and needed to take care of millions of new immigrants who came from all across the world due to the Holocaust, due to the pogroms that were done, the strengthening of the Islam, the killings of Jews all over the place. It was do or die. Come to Israel. It's the only place where you're not going to be persecuted because you're a Jew. And the Yemenite people, there was immediately the whole class thing. It always happens, right? The whole class thing was very, very apparent. Even my dad came from Iraq. They also lived in a refugee camp, but they had it better. They had a little bit of running water in the camp. They had just a little bit of means. My dad remembered living in a shack. My grandmother told me when I was there, from my mother's side, the Yemenite, they had nothing. They didn't have any running water. There was no way to clean up. They didn't have shacks. They had tents provided by the army in which they lived. And the conditions were horrible. They didn't have shoes. They barely had any clothes. I saw the original new immigrant booklet that they got, that lists that they got 3 spoons, 2 blankets, and a plate from the government, and so on and so forth. It was a very, very scarcity of resources was very apparent. And my grandmother became sick. She became sick with typhus. People died left and right. The stories are horrible. She tells that in the refugee camp, the place in which you would go to the bathroom was so slippery from the various excrements that every once in a while a baby would slip from a hand. The hands would just get too slippery and fall into the hole. And one night she was passing in the refugee camp and hearing screams, and a woman was barely holding the arm of a baby that slipped into the bathroom, if you may want to call it, into the excrement hole. And she helped save that baby. And so this understanding that the Jews, the Yemenite Jews in particular, had it so bad, and within my own family, was like a hammer hitting me when I was in Israel. And suddenly I realized why the poverty consciousness is so prevalent in my mother's family. So that was a big realization. But going back to, I'll talk about this a little more, but I want to go back to my grandmother. So she's sick with typhus, and my grandfather has no money to take care of her. But he hears about this place up north where people with typhus can rest and usually recover. And he collects puruta le puruta, cent to a cent, so that he can send her there. And eventually he does. He has enough money to send her there for 8 days, and he does, and she's saved. And when he comes to pick her up, he tells her, I have good news. We're moving into a home. And the home was a shack, no running water, no bathroom, but it had a roof. And that's where they lived. A place where right now in Jerusalem, there is a big, big co-op store that my grandmother shops in to this day. And she told me, yeah, this is where the shack was. And only years later, they got the appropriate financing and were able to get an actual home, and slowly and steadily built their family. My grandmother worked in cleaning houses and cleaning offices for 30 years, saving penny to penny. And she was telling me how my grandfather was so humble. He was kind of the kind of person who would give the shirt off his back to other people. But she says he lacked the inner strength to project himself to the world as a winner. So again, that imbalance, if you refer back to the episodes about the tree of life, or how everything in the tree of life is being balanced by two dichotomies, by two opposites. And there's three sections. There's the thought, there's the emotion, and there's the action. In the realm of the action, it is Hod against Netzach. Netzach is the masculine, that's the winning one, the victory, the dominant. Every action is either dominant or submissive. The other side is the submissive, Hod, grace. And we're all skewed to one side or another. And my grandfather was heavily skewed to the side of Hod, to the side of grace and submission. And therefore, when somebody owed him money, he didn't go get the money. When somebody asked him for something, he would always give. He would be the kind of guy that people would step on. And he was okay with it. My grandmother wasn't. And she told me various stories about that. And again, it was like a mirror into my own consciousness that was developed and built from the reflection of my family. And so here I am, sitting in the 7 days of mourning with my grandmother, with my uncle and aunts, all under the same roof, celebrating my grandfather, according, of course, to the strict Jewish traditions of the various prayers and customs. Those who are mourning are not allowed to do any work, not even the dishes or to get up and serve food. And so people come from all over the community and bring them food because they know they're not allowed to cook. And they are being served so that they can focus on their mourning. And it's quite a charade because there's a whole lot that is happening. People are coming at all hours of the day to say things, to tell stories about the deceased. And I was trying to sort of blend in. And of course, I don't know all the rules. So during Shabbat, when I was taking a rag and sort of squeezing it on top of the top of the sink, a whole bunch of men immediately like, oh, you're not allowed to do that on Shabbat. It's considered work. And just learning all the various laws related to that particular experience was very interesting to me. But the most important thing was to really, for the first time, understand the psyche of my own mother and the reality in which we grew up. We always had food on the table, but we didn't have a lot of money. And the poverty consciousness, as I mentioned before, was palpable, thick, viscous within the reality of our existence. And even now that my parents have more money, it's still there. My mom talks about it. And I'll give you an example of how this poverty consciousness within the people of Yemen, the Jews of Yemen, has manifested itself within the society. Every Adah, that is, every tribe of Jews, is being laughed at in some way in, common culture and popular culture. The Moroccans, for example, are hot-headed. They always carry a knife in their pockets. So does the comedy tells, because they are quick to anger and you don't want to mess with them. The Iraqi people are very, very good with accounting, with numbers. And lo and behold, my father, who's Iraqi, worked for the Ministry of Finance, running bills. He was an accountant himself. And I see that within me, the ability to work with numbers, the ability to work with money. And the Yemenite people, for example, and I'm not going to go into all the different tribes, but the Yemenite people are always laughed at that they're cheap. They're cheap people. Understanding that poverty consciousness, where they came from, helps understanding why that notion, that perception will take place. But the reality is, it's not true. Case in point, my grandmother walks in the cemetery one day, a few years back, and she sees a woman crying, and she asks her why, and the woman says, well, some hoodlums broke my husband's tombstone. A lot of times Arabs from various villages will go into the Jewish cemetery and break tombs. It's happening right now in the United States. All we have to do is look around and see that it's been a sore point for antisemitism. My English is kind of like a little rustic after being in Israel for 3 weeks, so forgive me. And breaking tombstones has always been something that those who hate the Jews do. And so she tells this woman, don't worry about it. And she goes to the office and she buys for thousands of shekels a new tombstones for this woman's husband. Now, you're talking about the same woman who is washing plastic bags in the washing machine so that they're not being wasted. Those same plastic bags that keep blocking her machine and that I had to fix while I was there. And I'm like, Grandma, why are you washing these plastic bags? She's like, well, I don't want to throw them out. So there's a difference between being cheap and being a saver, being somebody who has deep consciousness around the topic of waste, incapable of throwing anything away because they know what hunger is. They've been hungry. They've been thirsty. They had no home. They had no roof above their head, no floor under their feet, no shoes on their feet. So they know. It's entrenched in the psychology of the family. And here, I'm telling you all this for several reasons. First of all, I want to share with you that for the first time in my life, I suddenly realized that I found my community. I'm studying Kabbalah through different lenses, shall we say. As a person who grew up in a religious environment and became secular, then went abroad. I don't live in Israel. I don't live within that bubble of Judaism. I've started studying Kabbalah through the lens of Hinduism, Buddhism, even things like alchemy, Christianity. And I'm getting a whole different picture, but I have a gaping hole when it comes to the original traditional Judaism. And there's a lot of information, a lot to learn from that. We've been studying this for 2,000 years. And by going to Israel, by reconnecting with my mother's family from a place not of pain like it used to be in the past. I never felt like I belonged because I was always judged for not being religious. But for the first time, I was able to be there and hold true to my own path, knowing that I'm not religious, but you know what? I am spiritual. And kind of being able to hold my own. Suddenly, I wasn't judging those people who I always thought were judging me. And whether I was right or not is irrelevant. But the fact is, I broke that particular energetic connection and was able to relate to them and love them. And I found a community. Because these people, my very family, are scholars. And they know so much. I've learned so much about what I do from these people. It was unbelievable. My cousin, for example, Itamar, a bright young man. So I tell him about the Hebrew letters, and I say how I'm excited about this and about that, and how they weave into the tree of life, and you know the 3 mother letter and the 7 double letters and the 12 simple letters. And he listens to everything I say, and he says, "Oh, you know what? You will really enjoy reading this and that." And I also think that book will be great, and also read the teachings of Kook, the Rabbi Kook, who was this and that. I mean, the man has deep knowledge of the various rabbis and books and literature of traditional Judaism. And suddenly I found a door into the very knowledge that I am trying to study from the outside. And suddenly I'm inside. And these people, even though that I'm different, even though that I'm coming to Judaism from a whole different perspective, they accept me and they listen and they teach me and they even learn from me because I'm family. And so that was a big, big surprise and sort of something I did not expect and something that I enjoyed tremendously because I just never felt like I had a community of people that I could share this knowledge with and talk to about and learn from. And here I am in my own family, a family in which my mother's uncle, that is my grandfather's brother, was the world Bible winner champion in the 1960s, a man who was considered one of the greatest rabbis in Israel's history. I come from a family that had prophet within their heritage. And from my father's family, I realized that I come from a family of mystics, Bavel. And so this connection, this is the second reason why I'm telling you all this. The second piece of the puzzle is that our consciousness is shaped by our families. There's a big secret in Kabbalah about this. We spoke about the structure of the tree of life, and in the tree of life there are 6 spheres that are within the physical world. These 6 spheres represent the 2 lower triangles, 3 spheres each, on the tree of life. And the point is that these 6 spheres, together with a lower one called Malchut, kingdom, these 7 spheres in total are hinted in the Bible as the 3 fathers and the 4 mothers. We have the 3 fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and we have the 4 mothers. Sarah, who was Abraham's wife. Rivka, Rebecca, was Isaac's wife, Yitzchak's wife. And Jacob, who was also named Israel, had 2 wives, Leah and Rachel. Right? Now, here's the deal. This is a hint. Again, the entire Bible is a reflection of how human consciousness works and how the enlightenment process is. And this as well is a metaphor. Each and every one of us has 3 fathers and 4 mothers. It doesn't matter where we were born, who we were born to, how we were raised, if you were adopted, your parents were divorced, it does not matter. You have, by definition, by law of nature, you have 3 fathers and 4 mothers. The 3 fathers are your father's father, that is your grandfather from your father's side, your mother's father, that is your grandfather from your mother's side. These are your 3 fathers. And you have 4 mothers. You have your mother. You have your mother's mother, that is your grandmother from your mother's side. And then you have your father's mother, which is your grandmother from your mother's side. The 4th mother is your own subconscious, the mirror of your own personality. Remember, we said that the subconscious is the feminine. That subconscious is mirrored when you have a partner. So regardless if you're a man or a woman, your partner is your 4th mother. Their consciousness, they are a reflection of that 4th mother. Now, to investigate your own consciousness, you must look into your family, because these are the people who, with their strength, with their limitations, they have shaped your own consciousness, which is a reflection of the tree of life. So each and every one of those images, those figures, represent a skewed version, sometimes less, sometimes more, of one of those spheres. Case in point, my grandfather from my mother's side is the classic, the quintessential Hod, grace, which is the lower feminine sphere on the bottom triangle on the tree of life. That, as I said before, is everything submissive, everything that is graceful and giving. But it's lacking the balance from the feminine side of that same triangle called Netzach, victory. That sphere is the embodiment of my other grandfather, Ovadya, after which I took my middle name. He believed in winning, but he was very combative. Didn't have a lot of grace from that particular perspective. And so I have two grandfathers embodying two particular spheres on this triangle of the tree of life. And when I keep understanding who's the balance of what, I see who's Yesod, which is the balancing sphere for those two. I see who's Tiferet, which is the balancing sphere in the emotional realm. I see who's fear, which is Chesed, which is the masculine sphere on the emotional level, and I see who is fire and bravery, which is the feminine sphere on the emotional scale. So my family becomes a reflection of me through the tree of life. And by understanding the structure of this tree of life, by understanding the spheres, and by looking at our three fathers and our four mothers, and various other people in the family, how the manifestation of their own psyche has manifested within that, we can understand our own psyche. It is critical to mend relationships within our own family in order to reach maturity within our own consciousness. Sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes the people have died. Sometimes we've lost a chance. Sometimes somebody doesn't want to speak to us, but we can still do work to cut that energetic loop on our own. I had a little bit of an unclean energy connection with my aunt from my father's side of something I'd done and said 10 years ago, and she had a part of it too. It was an argument, and I said what I said, and I was right a little bit, and she was right a little bit, and I was wrong too, and she was wrong. But in this last trip to Israel, when I met her, I apologized. And she was like, 10 years ago, who cares? Don't worry about it. And yet the next day, she texted me and said, Erez, I thought about it. And I really, really appreciate that you said that you did that. And I could feel that it cleaned a particular energetic channel between us. And was also related to her primal wound. Let's revisit the primal wound because this is an important point when it comes to family. The primal wound is some kind of pain that we always have to deal with throughout our lives. And that wound is usually a synthesis of the wound of the father and the wound of the mother. And the key is to understand that wound through the investigation of ourselves in the eye of the family and heal it. Now, two things happen when you heal it. You understand your family and you learn to love them because you've learned to love yourself. The wound then heals. And then what happens? It doesn't pass. You've healed the wound of the family in that sense because you are the manifestation of your parents. You are the manifestation of your grandfather and grandmother. It says in the Bible, "Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha," and respect your mother and your father. And you should live a long life. And the reason it says so is because the key to enlightenment, the key to ego dissolution is our family. I don't care what kind of fight, what kind of argument, what kind of circumstances you have with your own family. Find a way to resolve them. Write a fake letter in your journal to every member of your family that you're not fully capable of loving. Tell them why not. Don't send it, but write it. Understand it. Understanding my own judgment about my own family helped me understand myself. One of the things that always bothered me, and I even spoke about it in Kabbalistic Mystic, was the fact that my mom, as loving as she is, she's just not the hugging type. I go to my grandmother, in my grandmother's home, and say, "Oh, grandma, can I give you a hug?" I'm a hugger, I'm a kisser, I'm very physical. It's coming from my father's family. Very warm people, the Iraqi people. Artistic too. But the Yemenite people, they're not artistic. They're intellectuals. But they're so intellectual on the spectrum, on the bell curve. If you take all the Jews and take all the various tribes of Jews and divide them into that bell curve of those who gravitate towards intellectualism versus those gravitate into intuitiveness, art. First of all, the vast majority of the Jews will be on the intellectual side. Let's face it. Jews, as a nation, I said it before, we are an obsessive compulsive nation on the spectrum. What is autism? What is Asperger's? It is the heavily focused consciousness on the intellect being stuck in your mind. Therefore, you have to have the patterns that keep you safe. Without the ability to read between the lines, without the ability to sense what is not sensed in regular speech. And yet, because of that skewed piece, you also have a deep connection into the unseen from within. But it's not externalized. Jews are like that. We're like that as a nation. I'm making a huge generalization. Of course, there's Jewish artists and so on and so forth. But in general, it is not our strength. That's why there's so many Nobel Prize winners among Jews. That's why there's so many scientific papers per capita. So many companies in NASDAQ. So many key people like Einstein, like Freud, who have led humanity into the next phase when it comes to our intellect. But us Jews are missing a piece of the puzzle in general, as a generalization. And the Yemenite Jews are a perfect manifestation and an example of that. So I go to my grandmother and I said, Grandma, can I give you a hug? Can I give you a kiss? And she's like, nope. And I said, can I give you a hug? And she said, nope. We love in the heart, she says, and walks away. They read books. They study. There's advantages and disadvantages in it. We came together as Jews into the land of Israel so that we can learn the secret and give it back to the world. This notion of being a chosen people has been mistaken into be a source of pride. But we must never forget the honor and the responsibility of the Jewish people as the carriers of the secret. And we must unveil the secret and put it out to the world. It is time. The knowledge is not going to get lost. There's internet. Everything is in books. It's there. The language has been revived. There's people speaking the language. It is time to open the box that is shackled by the obsessive compulsive nature of the Halacha, the law, that has been critical to preserve the Jewish tradition throughout the 2,000 years. Without it, it would have withered and died, and the secret would have been gone forever. That secret that is the heritage of the entire Western and Eastern world. It's the heritage of the Western world so that we can balance the traditions of the East. The traditions of the East are great, but there's a reason why there's so few that get enlightened. It's because they're skewed to the feminine. They focus on the transformation of the body and the transformation of the mind. The physical act. They're lacking the intellect. How does it work? For us to reach knowing, for us to reach enlightenment, knowing is the sphere that's located in the pineal gland, right between the eyes, the third eye. To open the third eye, you must have both the intellectual understanding and the experiential understanding. The Buddhists, the Hindus, the Eastern methodologies, they are expert when it comes to the body and the mind. Mastering the mind, transforming it through action, through the body. But when it comes to the intellect, that is the power of the West. And the ancient Hebrew wisdom is that secret. Studying it while doing yoga, while opening the body, which is the temple of the God within. Our body is the temple. In Judaism, there's this entire notion of we have to rebuild the temple so that God will come. Temple is the body. God will come from within. We have to build our own body to transform it. Hinduism will tell you how to do that. But we also have to understand the intellectual piece. And therefore, Halacha, the Jewish law, I feel like Halacha is like oars that we've used in order to row ourselves into safety, into To dry land, we had to pass the entire ocean. And now we are rowing on dry sand, on land. And it is time for us to think about it and say, do we need it? All these laws, all these layers and layers of laws that were added throughout the years, how can we strip it back to basics and ask ourselves, why were we given these laws? What is the metaphor for which they stand? And instead of focusing on, am I allowed to tear a piece of paper on Shabbat? Or am I allowed to open an umbrella? Or am I allowed to cook something when I'm mourning? We can ask ourselves, what speaks to our hearts? And what is the secret behind this particular metaphoric law that was designed and written in a way that was so sophisticated so that we can extract it back years and years later, and yet nobody else would, and it would never get lost. That's what I feel about Halacha. And that's why I'm okay with not following Jewish law to a T. There's a whole movement here in the US that subscribes to that particular approach. It's called Renewal Judaism. And yet when you go in Israel, the conservative Jews that are the vast majority of Jews in Israel, including my family, there is an obsessiveness with the law. And again, I understand why. But I call and tell those who are listening, who are observing Jews, ask yourself, if you're mourning on a particular individual, and that person loved your cooking, and suddenly you're not allowed to cook because the law says you're not allowed to cook. Some rabbi somewhere, somebody decided you're not allowed to cook. Wouldn't that be honoring the person who died more if you stood in that kitchen and yet once more cooked and filled the kitchen with the sense that that person loved so much? And imagine as if they're still sitting there waiting for the food to be ready so you can serve them. Who's to say what's right and wrong? So we spoke about the Jews, and we spoke about the role of the diaspora from a high-level perspective. We spoke about the role of the Halacha, of the law, to preserve the secret throughout the obsessive compulsiveness of Jewish law. Through 2,000 years, there's not a nation on the face of the planet that has managed to pass knowledge in such accuracy. There's not a nation on the face of the planet that has its entire history from start to finish documented to a T, other than the Jewish people. And there's a reason for that. We are called the people of the book. And it is not our book. This book belongs to the world. It contains a secret that every individual on the face of this planet can benefit from. The secret of consciousness exploration and the secret of enlightenment. The secret of illumination within. It works. I was really trying to avoid saying it throughout the initial episodes of Kabbalistic Mystic. And I have to say, I've been going through some kind of an identity crisis when it comes to this podcast. But I decided I'm not going to change its name. Kabbalistic Mystic, because I come from a family of Kabbalists and scholars. Mystic, because I come from a family on my father's side of mystics. People who are deeply connected with the unknown. And so I am a Kabbalistic mystic. And so can you. We all have it. Kabbalah is the art of understanding the wisdom in the Hebrew letters as a map of human consciousness evolution. It's an art, it's not a science. You can't do it by studying, by just listening to this podcast, by reading books, by studying and practicing Halacha. It has to be done by experience, by interacting with our families, our friends, the world, by leaning into the desire, by leaning into the fear, by healing all the relationships, all the connections that are not functioning well, by finding love in every place in our consciousness that we don't have love, by finding forgiveness for ourselves and others. We are explorers of consciousness. That's what we do. We don't need a psychologist. We don't need external entities in order to do it for us. We can use psychologists to help us, but we are the explorer. Nobody can explore our consciousness other than we are. The Hebrew letters are the map. And we can use them to understand our own consciousness and continue to explore and heal ourselves. We can heal allergies in our body. We can heal issues with our body. We can heal our emotions. We can heal our primal wounds. We can become better people. We can learn how to love each and every person. We can learn how to forgive. It is possible. I've seen it happen. We can learn how to use the tools that are standing in our disposal. For example, the dreams, journaling, art, the work of the body, physical exercise, studying our families as a reflection of our own consciousness, the people we grew up in, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandfathers, grandmothers, and of course our parents, the pivotal source, the ground zero of our psychological distortions. And so this podcast is for that. I'm going to try to share as much as I can from my own personal journey so I can be of an example to how this process works. And I will try to weave in as much information as I can intuitively as possible so that you can benefit from it. I'll talk to you about Kabbalistic yoga and how each and every pose and difficulty with a pose can be tied back to one of the 12 sections of our own consciousness, and therefore we can understand how we can unblock it, by which speeding the process in which we transform our bodies. I'll talk to you about alchemy and how it's related. I'll talk to you about Shabbat, what Shabbat means and how you can enjoy it without needing to observe the Jewish law. I'll talk to you about marijuana and its role in consciousness evolution. I'll talk to you about wanderers, who they are, how to know if you're one, and what their role on this planet at this particular place and time. Those and other topics I plan to discuss over the next few weeks and months. So keep joining me. Pass it around to those you think who will benefit from it. I thank again to all those who have downloaded the episodes over the past few weeks, and those who wrote reviews. Your reviews help beyond what you think. Every time I hear from each and every one of you, every time I get a review, it is lifting my heart, is giving me more energy to show up again and again and talk to you and share what I'm learning. I thank you again for listening from Spokane, Washington. This is Ovadya Batat, wishing you love in every moment.